This includes students of English 377 and of course guests for Seat at the Table week. So thank you. We're happy to have you here.
Sorry, can someone say something? I'm not sure if my audio is working.
Hi, George. Glad you're here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you.
Perfect.
Hi, George. I'm making a cup of tea. Would you like one?
I would be kind of a trip, yeah.
Welcome, everyone. Very glad to have you here. We'll get started in just a minute. We're have one of our panelists. I want to make sure I get on our first screen, but we'll get started on time as close as possible. Angelica, say hi if you're here.
Hi.
That's where you are. Very good. All right, Angelica, JaNaya, George, you ready? Terrific. So happy to have you all here. This is English 377's class meeting time. And so there's a lot of communication, sports journalism, and education majors in the room, but we're delighted to be part of Seat at the Table Week. And I just want to introduce who our presenters are, and we'll get right started. And Kate's going to help us out. There's still people in the waiting room if you don't mind letting them in. So this session is called Language Judgments as Microaggressions. The parentheses are around it because of Ibram Kendi's point that microaggressions really aren't so micro, and we really need to think about the true damage that these sorts of racial judgments can have on people. And our panel today is JaNaya Ashley, Angelica Core, an alumni, as well as George Kelley. And I just wanted to start with a couple of quotes from James Baldwin in an essay called "If Black English Isn't a Language, Then Tell Me What Is." And this conversation about language varieties goes back a long time. In 1979, he wrote how language incontestably reveals the speaker. Language also, far more dubiously, is meant to define the other. And what we're going to be talking about today is how people are passing judgments on whose language is better, whose language is not as good. He points out language is also a political instrument, means, and proof of power. It's the most vivid and crucial key to identity. It reveals the private identity and connects one with or divorces one from the larger, public, or communal identity. And of course, for those of us who care about having a just world, a socially just world, we want to be very conscious of power and very inclusive in our practices. One last quote from Baldwin. He says, "It is not the Black child's language that should be in question. It is not his language that is despised. It is his experience." So he was calling American culture out for its racism, and that this isn't really about objectively whose language is better or worse, that there's other things at stake here. And Ibram Kendi, who we have coming to the college in the spring, said something very similar about his language variety, which he called Ebonics. Why is Ebonics considered broken English, but English is not considered broken German? So a couple of the terms that these scholars use include Black English, African American English, African American Vernacular English, or Ebonics. And I kind of want to stop here and just sort of see what we know. So in the chat soon, you will get a link of a quick poll that I want you to take. It is not collecting your name. This poll will just help us see what people currently know about this language variety. So if you're on the phone, this is hard to access, but if you're on a laptop, if you can just click on that link, and here, I'll add it again because we're still signing in. Click on that Google form and take that quick survey for just a couple of seconds. And then our first speaker, JaNaya, will be ready to talk to us. We'll take a minute.
Should I start now, or were you going to tell me when to go?
Let's give them 1 or 2 more minutes. There's a couple questions on the poll.
Oh, okay.
As I said, the poll is not collecting any personal information. It's just helping us understand what we already know about language varieties in America. All right. So first, our panelists are going to introduce us to a couple key thoughts, and then there will be time for more of a conversation and questions and answers. So our first speaker is going to be JaNaya Ashley, and she is going to speak about respecting students' language, avoiding language microaggressions in the classroom.
Hi, I'm JaNaya, and I feel like as an education major and as a current 6th grade student teacher, I feel like it's important to respect a student's language variety in the classroom. And I also feel like it's helpful to respect the student's language variety in the classroom, because to overcorrect them, it kind of gets like disrespectful, because you're basically telling them like, look, like what you're saying is not right. You should be saying it like this because it's standard English. And I feel like it's disrespectful because it's actually still correct if they're saying something in Black English. All because it's not in standard English, it shouldn't be seen as incorrect. And And then I also have a video that I wanted to show you all with the teacher who's teaching their students how to translate something they might say at home in Black English to standard English. And I like this video because he's doing it in like a respectful and interactive way instead of saying like, oh, that's incorrect and here's why. So you can start it, Becky, and at 2:10 all the way to the end.
Did you hear the video as I moved it?
No, I didn't hear it.
Okay, I'm sorry, 1 second while I get that setting.
It's fine.
Okay.
The LA school system knows its minority students will need to be, in effect, bilingual. PS 100 in Watts is one of 60 schools using an experimental program called Academic English Mastery.
I need all groups to pay.
The LA school system knows its minority students will need to be, in effect, bilingual. PS 100 in Watts is one of 60 schools using an experimental program called Academic English Mastery.
I need all groups to pay attention. Cloyd, I need your focus now. And Gerardo.
Daniel Russell uses a game of Jeopardy to teach his grade 5 class how to translate their home language into mainstream American.
Okay, here we go. My grandpa cooked dinner every night.
Third person singular. Cook. My grandpa cooks dinner every night.
Which linguistic feature is not in mainstream American English?
Third person singular.
Yes. And Marisol, how do you code switch this into mainstream American English?
My grandpa cooks dinner every night.
You just got 500 more points. He's funny.
He is funny.
Okay, Ariel Baron, what's the answer?
He is funny.
He is funny? Excellent translation. Here we go. We don't have nothing to do. Okay, quiet please.
We don't have nothing to do.
Oh, I'm sorry. That is not, oh wait, that is not an accurate translation in mainstream American English. So you're at minus 400. So let me roll. Let's see which team will have an opportunity to get it. I might roll you guys again. 1.
Anything. We don't have anything to do.
Excellent translation.
I think perhaps the biggest misunderstanding is the idea that we are somehow teaching African American language, teaching Ebonics, if you will. We don't need to teach African American language. They already know it.
Yeah.
Our task is to help move them towards mastery of the language of school in its oral and written form, but to do that in a way where they are not devalued or where they feel denigrated in any way by virtue of their cultural and linguistic differences. Because when you begin to devalue youngsters and make them feel that who they are doesn't count, then we turn them off from education.
Last night, we baked cookies. Are you ready? Okay, number 1, what language is it in? It is an African American language. Number 2, what linguistic feature is in AAL?
Past tense marker, ED.
Past tense marker ED, that's 2. And how do you code switch it into mainstream American English?
Last night we baked cookies.
You got 500 more points. Is it too easy or I just taught you well this year?
Yeah, so that was the video. And I also wanted to add that I liked it because, like, again, he's telling them that it's still correct, but here's how you can code switch it if you would like to. Then that's it for my part.
Thank you. All right, we're going to hear briefly from Angelica next, and she is going to be speaking to, sorry, tech. Oh, you graduated from Springfield College, workplace language microaggressions.
Hi everyone, I'm Angelica Core. I'm actually going to start with work just because like that's more recent and I'm currently taking a break from work to participate now. So I work for a newspaper and currently I'm the only person of color. If I was actually informed correctly, I'm the first person of color they ever hired. They don't treat me different, but just by the way they interact with me, you know how often they surround themselves with people of color. Because I am the only person of color, I do have to be mindful of how I talk. My coworkers and editors are super chill and pretty open about things that normal jobs wouldn't be open about, but I have to, be mindful that I am Black and I never want to sound like how I would talk if I'm with my friends, just in case they don't know how to take it, they get uncomfortable or think I'm being, ratchet or any of the words that people unfortunately use to describe Black people. And it sucks that I do this, kind of just like a switch, because when they talk, like as if they're with a group of friends, I don't think any different of them. But, that's just me. In my few weeks of working there during our Zoom meetings, we were talking about a show, and I believe I asked like what service I could stream it on, and a white woman said, "Oh, I just want to warn you that there's a scene of where they hang a Black character, and it could be pretty traumatizing." And I just awkwardly looked at the camera because I honestly didn't know what to say. I was shocked that she felt the need to quote unquote warn me, as if me being Black isn't traumatizing enough, especially with everything going on today. A TV scene is not going to traumatize me any more than hopping on social media and seeing a man who reminds me of my father being choked to death. I actually witnessed my dad get beat by the cops. A scene in a TV show is not going to change my life. A story I wrote about this organization that is holding their town accountable for changing things such as like the way police respond to situations, having a school resource officer, and having more people of color in school buildings for the students of color. I was told to do a profile on that organization. In the middle of me covering the story, the mayor of the town released a statement. So obviously I have to incorporate that and, just state what she said and what she was addressing to the group. When the story was published, I sent it out to the organization because I was happy. It was great work. But I was thrown back and immediately had to reach out to my editors because the story was completely changed. My editor changed the narrative of the story and made it seem like it was more so what the mayor was talking about and discrediting what this organization is doing. And I was like, livid because I was told to do a profile on an organization and now the story is about what the mayor said. And, being Black and writing about a Black organization, I took a lot of pride in that. It was great research. It was such a fun story. And I was just really upset that it was changed without warning. And, of course, I didn't want to seem like the angry Black girl, but I did have to protect my work and, what I stand for. And then two little things that I want to go into really quickly is that I'm terrible at pronouncing words. In elementary school, I was behind in English really, really bad. And yeah, I obviously caught up, but I still have major troubles. And I know that, I try to do things to get better at that. But being in a workplace with all white people, I get really nervous and I try not to speak up during the meetings. Like if I have like a story that has like a word that I don't know how to pronounce, I just like really try to shorten it. And obviously I'm aware of my issue, but I don't need to tell everyone that I speak to that I have this issue. But when it comes to work, I'm just a little uncomfortable because I don't want them to assume that, I'm uneducated or I'm not doing, or I haven't done the work in school to know how to pronounce that words that might seem really, really easy to some people. And my last point is, recently I've noticed that I receive a different level of respect, and people talk to me in a different tone when they find out that I graduated from Springfield College. Obviously, this can be for a number of reasons, like how young I look, but those people that are shocked at my age and that I was able to graduate from college, they make it a point to let me know that that's what they were shocked about. Like, oh wow, you know, you look 15. I'm surprised you graduated from college. But other people just kind of like just change their whole attitude and just let the conversation go on. And that leads me to think, like, you know, are they shocked because I'm Black and they're shocked that I graduated from a predominantly white college, an expensive college at that? And it just frustrates me, because anyone who receives a degree, regardless of where it comes from, a university, a community college, a program, you know, anything, should receive the same amount of respect, because a degree is a degree and everyone puts in, you know, the work to get it. That's all for me.
Thank you, Angelica. Powerful reminders about the privilege that white folks experience, the unearned privilege of not having to represent our entire race the way that a lot of Black folks feel like they have to be exemplary and representative. And then also, you know, the trauma of people's expectations. So yeah, I think we can definitely say a lot more about that in the question section. George, I want to yield to you now, let you give your opening statement, and then we will have some time for some questions from our participants in the audience. George Kelley.
Sure, thank you. So I kind of just wanted to give my take on the whole idea of language varieties and kind of the value that we place on these different language varieties. Because of what I study, I come from a social science background. And so when I think about how people speak, the frame I'm using is more of coming from a social kind of proximity, right? Like, it depends on where you are, how you grew up, what words you hear, how you hear them spoken. And so there are all sorts of different language varieties within the US and in other countries, right? Like, English is not this monolithic thing. And we all know that. You hear people pronounce certain things differently, use certain words differently, use certain words more frequently than others. I think where it becomes an issue is, again, the value that we place on certain language varieties. And you see that in cases where certain language varieties are seen as more like intellectual. And it's not necessarily because they kind of adhere more strictly to grammatical English, right? It's just what people are used to hearing in certain contexts, right? Like, when we speak, we don't necessarily speak with the best grammar ever, right? But nevertheless, certain varieties are treated with more respect, it seems. In my personal experience, I always get the compliment, if you want to call it that, oh, you're very articulate. And this has actually been something that's been happening my whole life. And I always understood the term as, you know, someone who's able to clearly express themselves. I never understood it as having to be like sort of matching any sort of grammatical like standard, right? It's just if you can express yourself in a way that people can understand what you're saying, right? Like, I get what you're saying, and if you can do that, you are someone who's articulate. But it feels like this term is sort of used because people are somewhat taken aback when I speak, as if their expectation, as if I've in some way not matched their expectation. And I think that gets back to, again, what language varieties we place value on. right? Like the compliment comes out of, oh, I value this language variety that you're using, and so I'm going to compliment it because I think like it's good and you talk nice, you talk well. Whereas other language varieties that I also use aren't seen as a good thing or aren't given that same compliment as being articulate. I remember, actually, this is one other thing that happens too. Sometimes you'll hear people say, oh, you sound white, or on the other hand, when you talk like that, I don't know what you're saying, or I can't understand what you're saying. And again, we see that values are being placed on these different language varieties, and the value that's placed on the variety that's seen as more articulate is more generally assigned to white individuals, as if language as a color. And so I think thinking about how we place value on language varieties and how we think about those things in the racial context can help us kind of peel back what our biases are, if that makes any sense. Thank you.
Well said, George. Thanks for focusing us on the systemic and the value judgments that people are placing and the biases that go behind that. JaNaya has one more point, and then I want the participants and audience to start thinking about questions you have for our panel, and I can share the results of our informal survey as well to sort of see what we already know about this American variety that is spoken by some Black speakers some of the time. JaNaya.
Okay, so now I just wanted to talk about why it's a problem when non-Black people use Black English. So first, like, it's already kind of unfair that if somebody who's non-Black use my language, they're looked at like as cool and like trendy and stuff. But when I use my own language from like home, especially in a professional setting, you know, oh, she's ghetto, look how she's talking, or oh, she's ratchet, she's not smart. So that's one point why it's already unfair for non-Black people to use like my language. And then another thing is that I feel like it's very like foolish for non-Black people to use Black English, especially when talking to other Black people, because I feel like they're using it like, oh, like they're not going to understand like when I speak standard English, so let me try to speak Black English so they can like try to understand me. And it's like, no, like I can understand you without you trying to use Black English. So, you know, I would appreciate it if you don't try to talk like that when you're talking to me. And that was kind of it, just talking about like appropriating it.
Thank you. You all gave us a lot to talk about and follow up on. So we can go straight into the questions, or if people are being shy, I can share the results of our poll and what we already knew at the beginning of the session, or thought we knew or didn't know about the Black English variety. So if you have a question, I'd ask if you could type in the chat question, and then we can recognize you. You can ask an individual, or you can ask the entire panel. Great, Sherry Vandenacker, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I was listening to another session and I left that one early and came into here late. So I'm so sorry if I missed part of what this question is. So I'm white. I'm a first generation college student, and I came from a very working class background. And when I went to college, I started to lose my Worcester County accent. And I learned all kinds of wonderful vocabulary that I loved. I was an English major, and I learned different grammatical structures, and this became more me. Then when I went home and I was speaking the language I was learning at school, it really caused some social class difference. And I wonder if this can add yet another layer to many of these issues you're bringing up here. I think sometimes for me, it ended up being almost alienating. Like the family would push back a little bit, like, oh, listen to Miss Fancy Pants. Oh, you think you're better than us. And it felt like a loss of my culture of origin to be speaking in this new way, yet it felt like a betrayal of who I was becoming to not speak in ways that were becoming more natural for me. And I just wonder if there's if anybody else has felt any of those conflicts.
If I can touch on that, something similar, if I'm understanding you correctly, happens in my household. Like, I think just like 2 weeks ago, I was talking to my mother, brother, and sister, and they were making fun of me because they were like, "Oh, we asked you a simple question, and you're like saying all these things, and we don't know what you're saying. Just get to the point. Just say, just give an answer to what we're asking." And I was like, "This is how I talk. This is how I speak. Like, I don't know, I don't know how else to phrase this. This is how I talk." So yeah, there is that kind of clash, and I honestly think it comes down to again what people are familiar with, and the whole idea of code switching, right? Be it if you're code switching to speak to somebody in a particular group, or in speaking in a more formal sense, right? Like, I wouldn't use the same word choices I would with my professor as I would like my friend that I've known for like 10 years and we grew up together. So I think, again, it's like what people are familiar with, and what they're familiar with, they're comfortable with. And I think that's how they assign value to these different varieties. It's what they're comfortable with and what they're familiar with. And so maybe your family was more familiar with the other way of speaking, and they kind of took issue with the different way you started to speak, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely part of it. It just seemed really complex because it also seemed like it felt like value judgment, like, oh, those fancy people who went to college and are our bosses, now you're more like them than like us. It felt like a betrayal, I think, to some of my family members. So,
can I ask a follow-up to the rest of the panel? I mean, have you felt pressures from Black colleagues, friends, for sounding too white whenever you speak in your professional, educated mainstream English?
I can speak to that. I'm from Springfield, so even when I told people that I was going to Springfield College, I kind of like started getting like, people act like they had chips on their shoulders, as if I was going to school for free, as if I'm gonna change, like be white, as if that me is gonna change. I'm just getting an education somewhere, and obviously I learned a lot in college. So if we were having a conversation about something, for example, like, don't want to go into it, but like Christopher Columbus, finding the United States, I would correct people, and, oh, you know too much, or you think you know too much, and I'm like, oh, okay, I just was teaching you proper history. I'm sorry that the Springfield Public Schools taught you something else. I don't think I'm better because I don't think Christopher Columbus founded the United States. I'm just trying to correct you as a friend. And even to go to Sherry's point, my dad's Black, my mom's white, and I'll speak how I like to speak with my mom, and she like kind of corrects me and like kind of checks to see that I don't talk how I talk, in professional setting. And I'm like, well, I'm an adult, like I've been through life, I know how to talk to people. You're my mom, and I shouldn't have to talk to you, quote unquote, properly. I should just be able to like shoot the shits with you, excuse my language, but like just talk to you how I would talk to my friends, like obviously with the respect that she's my mom, but I shouldn't feel like I have to be someone I'm not. So that could be frustrating because I feel like she doesn't value like that side of me, or doesn't understand that side of me. And then if I go trying to teach her like what that means to me or how that makes me feel, it's a whole nother story. So
I'll let JaNaya weigh in on this too, but I think both Angelica and George have spoken really powerfully to how difficult it is to be their authentic selves, getting pressures from all sides, from white folks and from Black folks, as to what that means. And so that can be a real challenge. JaNaya?
Yeah, I feel like it's also a lot of pressure on me because I'm in college and like some of my cousins, like they didn't even finish high school. So whenever I would go see them, they're already thinking like, oh, she's too good because she's almost done with college and like I don't even have my high school diploma. So I already go there knowing that they're already thinking that because they tell me this all the time. They think I'm too good to hang out with them. So now when I'm talking with them, I can already like see like their facial expressions like she thinks she's better than us, da, 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 da. And I'm just like, I'm not, like I'm really not. And I hate when people like think that of me. And I feel like it's a shame that like I can't even go to my family and like talk to them how I want to because they already think that I'm too good, and now they think that I'm even like better because I speak like standard English around my family sometimes. I mean, don't get me wrong, like if I want to use Black English, like I will, and like I can, but it's like most of the time I'm not. So like mostly like when I use like Black English is like with my friends because you know we're like close and stuff like that. But with some of my family, like when I see them, like I try not to use it. I don't know. I feel like we code switch between like different groups of people who we talk to, and like everybody does this, and I noticed that I do it too. But yeah, it's a lot of pressure on me.
Joe had a question, and we have a number of questions that are about how we should handle the use of Black English in the classroom, and how to actually encourage and validate students' language. So, Joe, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I don't really want to switch the topic from code switching because I think that's super interesting. But mine was for Angelica. First off, nice to see you.
Hi, Joe.
I wanted to ask the response from your editors when you brought up your opposition to how they changed your story. What was the response from them, and how did you in turn respond to that? And also,
go ahead.
Organization too.
Can you repeat the last part of your question?
The organization response to your story and like how you might have, if they said something back, how you responded again.
We have 3 editors, so I reached out to all 3 because I don't know who edited what, and I only got a response back to the actual person who edited it, and he just basically said like, because we're remote, it's hard to let you know what I'm physically editing, so next time I'll try to do better. And I was like, well, it's not things like you changing my punctuation or what I'm spelling wrong. It's literally the overall story, and clearly he didn't understand that, and I didn't want to keep like going back and forth about it. I just had to just suck it up and say like, all right, if this happens again, I won't be surprised. Thankfully, the organization didn't say anything. I don't think they knew that it was supposed to be a profile. I don't think I said that. I just asked like obviously profile-y questions. And I didn't get too much into the mayor because by the time we spoke, the mayor didn't say anything. And I didn't want to say anything over email just in case like, it was screenshotted and posted online, how that stuff goes. So when I finally was able to speak to her on the phone, I just like apologized because that wasn't my story. And I wanted her to know what I wanted to do with that story. So now I just try to work with them and like highlight stuff they're doing where white people aren't able to take over that story. So for example, if they're going to do a protest, I want to write a story about it because no one's going to, do something to take away from their protest, if that makes sense.
So you're speaking really powerfully, Angelica, to the fact that we need representation in all leadership positions, but it's also very difficult to be like the only person of color, right? Mm-hmm. If there were more people of color in the newsroom, maybe your story wouldn't have gotten changed, right? More people would get it. And so it would be understood that this is a valid perspective and it doesn't need this counterpoint made to it. So who gets to tell the stories, whose language variety is preferred, these are all very important issues related to power. I want to say just something really briefly about what we've been talking about, which is Black English. And from a language perspective, how linguists understand this, it is a valid language variety. It's not a substandard form of English, but a lot of the people in this group admitted to not knowing a whole lot about this variety. So only, these people on this end, the 4s and 5s, said they felt like they knew a lot about Black English. Black English is a combination of a variety of things. It is a combination of pronunciation, word choices. It's not just slang. It does have a unique grammar, but it is not a substandard variety of English. It's just an alternative form. A lot of people acknowledge that they feel like the variety is not respected. And this is really unfortunate because it is a truly American variety and it has some incredibly sophisticated features that people who choose to use it, all Black speakers don't use this all the time. And it's not only Black speakers who use this, so that's some of the misunderstandings. And so that was some of the questions that people weighed in on. Black English is not used all of the time by Black Americans. A lot of people understood that it is a non-standard variety. It's just not considered mainstream, but that doesn't mean that it is inferior. But we, had a lot of people not sure about that too. We had a little uncertainty about whether certain pronunciations are better than others. So I can share these results with people and we can sort of talk about them more, and I'll sort of annotate some of the misunderstandings on there. But I want to get to the classroom questions we had a bunch about. What do you all think about how this variety should be approached in the classroom? How can teachers respect students' home varieties and yet at the same time also make sure students have an access to standard English that they might need for success in the workplace in the future? Anybody want to take that one?
I think that's definitely a tough question. I mean, the way I see it, again, different settings have different standards, but the way I see it, if I can understand what you're saying, we're good to go. But I know most professional settings are not so relaxed. I think as far as the educators, I think if it's not necessarily your field, you shouldn't, like, I wouldn't mind if my English teacher corrected my grammar or, pointed me to this and that as it relates to like language and spoken language, because, that's my English teacher, right? That's what their job is. But I don't think I would be so open to somebody else critiquing the way I speak. I might take offense to that as if they're kind of stepping out of bounds there. But yeah, I think it depends kind of what your wheelhouse is. Like, if you're a big English person and that's what you do, go ahead, right? Like, do your job. If you're not, maybe save it, unless you're like really comfortable with that person and you feel like that's something they really need, or you feel like you can do so in a way that they might be receptive to. I think you kind of have to read the room there. So that's my take.
We have a couple hands, Felicia and Sabrina.
Hi everyone, I'm Felicia Lundqvist, the Director of Multicultural Affairs at Springfield College. And one of the things I think is relevant to this particular session is thinking about instructors or teachers or professors' level of cultural competencies too. I had a student who talked about, she was an international student who had learned British English, and she used learnt a lot, and she was corrected by some of her faculty members, when in fact, depending on culturally, again, when you think about code switching and where you grew up and culture and dialect, that that was something that was very much encompassed in her everyday life in a word that was used. And so I also think about the internalization of this, right? The messages that are enforced and how that student was actually correctly using this word, but because the instructor wasn't familiar that this was sort of British English, I guess, had given them a bit of a complex. And so, and I'm sure that there are other experiences like that people have had or shared experiences. And I think that that's also something that we need to be mindful of when we think about code switching, language and dialect, and systemic oppression, and particularly looking at sort of the internalized area around systemic oppression. And I just wanted to kind of share that too about, it's we have to be mindful and self-aware as educators, whether or not that's in or outside of the classroom, and the way in which we're impacting individuals that we're speaking with or trying to correct that we may not even have the context or the information to be able to do.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, there's not a single correct spelling. Linguists agree, you know, it's just whose is the privileged spelling. And that might be different in America than in Great Britain. That might be different in New England than it is in the South. I say aunt, other people say aunt. One of those isn't right and one of those isn't wrong. Sabrina, what would you like to say to this issue?
So I'm not gonna lie, I kind of forgot the foundation of the question, but I just wanted to say that for any like future educators in here, I think someone in the chat had asked about should you teach code switching in a classroom, and I think that's a really fine line. I think in order to have those conversations, one, it depends on what age group you're even working with, because like some younger kids really won't understand what that is. So if you're like an elementary teacher, maybe you shouldn't have those conversations with your students, but maybe start off with something small by acknowledging, you know, other people speak different ways and there's no such thing as a right or wrong way. If you're working with like middle schoolers and high schoolers, I think that that's definitely a conversation that you should have with your students. But I think in order to have that conversation, you kind of have to have like a starter conversation about racism in and of itself and like inequality, because they're not going to be able to fully understand why one language is deemed better or worse than the other without fully understanding what racism is. And, you know, like depending on what you're teaching, you might not have all the answers to that either. So definitely don't overshare on something you don't know, because you don't want to give misinformation. But I think teaching code switching, I think like personally, I think that that's kind of a like fine line. I'm looking at it more as a bad idea just because it depends on how you phrase it, I guess. I think if you say, you know, in a certain setting, you will have to project yourself in a certain way, and this is what people will deem as educational or respectful, and this is the only setting that you should feel as though you have to follow with that type of language. Don't ever feel pressured to follow that type of language in any other setting if you really don't feel comfortable enough to do so. And also expressing that, you know, just driving that point home that your language is who you are and that's a part of your culture and there's no reason to be ashamed of that. And also making sure that it's a comfortable space where people can respectfully educate other people by saying, you know, like, even though like this is the setting that we're in and we're supposed to be speaking properly, like if I'm at work and I'm at lunch, I should be able to let my hair down and speak how I speak if and when the time comes. So I think if, like all in all, if you're going to be an educator, it depends on who you're teaching, or like what subject you're teaching, and also how you go about teaching it, but making sure that you drive home the point that you are who you are and there's nothing wrong with who you are, but some people might tell you so, and here's how you can kind of work around that.
Yeah, I think that's what JaNaya liked about that clip that she wanted us to show, that we showed in her history of the English language class, that classroom teacher was very respectful. He didn't say one was good English. He didn't use a value judgment. He didn't say it was correct English. He just called it mainstream. And so there was a recognition that some people expect people to be able to speak this variety. And then he called it people's home language, because he recognizes the point that Sabrina and a number of our panelists have brought up about how closely language is tied to identity, and no one wants to be corrected all of the time and be told that their form of speaking is inferior or symbolizes something that it has absolutely no direct connection to. So all of these attitudes about what is lazy, what is educated, what is uneducated, what is ghetto, these are completely detached from any kind of reality. These are just racist value judgments that we want to resist. We do still have a little bit of time left, but I want to note that I put a little link in the chat, and I will share that with Cherie Stilvecchio in the Office of Multicultural Affairs, so that if you're interested in reading more, you can click through on that link for some additional resources. And I want to remind all of our participants, we really want to hear your thoughts on this session. So there is a Google evaluation form, if you can click onto that. Let's see, I've kind of lost track of our questions. Kate, do you want to call on someone, or is there a pressing question? A lot of them had to do with education.
Justine in the chat had a question. How does the subsuming or appropriation of so-called non-standard Englishes into mainstream U.S. English influence this conversation?
I'm happy to explain more of the question if necessary. I guess what I'm asking is how we're able to make this clear-cut distinction, right? So African-American languages and cultures and literature and music, I mean, have been historically appropriated by white dominant culture and then not given credit, right? So you know, so-called mainstream standard English is itself influenced by non-standard Englishes, right? So how do we, and historically, right, if we think about in times of when, you know, slavery was legal, that you know, so-called Black English was a matter of survival, right? It could be a way to communicate within a community without the oppressors knowing what's going on, right? So yeah, I guess I'm kind of wondering like how power and then like co-optation and appropriation, you know, how do we actually make these distinctions?
That's a great question, Justine, and JaNaya had sort of touched on that a little bit. George, you want to speak to that as well? You're unmuted.
Yeah, I don't think I completely can speak to everything the question encapsulates, but as far as how power relates to that and how the dominant culture affects what aspects of this language is like acceptable, I think it comes down to just what people take a liking to. Like in my personal experience, I remember like I'll like walk around sometimes and I'll hear white kids say things like use different slang words that like I've never heard like honestly white people use before. I'm like, oh, like white kids like know that word now. And like it's and I say now because it takes time. There's this like, I don't know why it is, but there's this like time lag, right? Where like certain words will become acceptable in mainstream American English, and it's not like, and even though it's still seen as slang, it's not frowned upon anymore. It's like,
no,
oh,
George, this is a great point.
That's cool now to say like excuse my language, but like the one term you hear a lot is like dead ass, which means like seriously, like I'm like being like serious, right? Like that term, and or things like terms like simp, like different things get co-opted over time and become okay to say, whereas before, if somebody said it, it's like, well, like, what are you like saying? Like, what's that word? I'm not familiar with it. And like, it's devalued. So I think it comes down to power and who has that power.
Absolutely. This is this form of appropriation and how white culture has habitually taken over. And so that, as JaNaya was saying, something that she and other Black speakers might be judged for using at a particular time period, then a year or two later enters the mainstream through popular media, through journalism, through entertainment, you know, through hip hop lyrics, and suddenly white folks use it and it's considered acceptable. And so that double standard is really frustrating. We are at time, but I'm willing to stay. I don't have a class after this. I want to thank everyone for all of your great questions. And so anyone who wants to continue the conversation will stay as long as you want to. But thank you so much. Please fill out the form. Please attend tons of other great seat at the table events. Dr. Logan has a great one coming up on microaggressions in the classroom. JaNaya is on later today with Sabrina Williams talking about colorism. I had a whole slide. I'm running out of time to show you. So I want to see what other questions we have.
There was another question in the chat. How does, oh wait, hold on, that was Justine, so I gotta scroll up because people keep chatting. Okay, here we go. Still scrolling. All right, in schools, do you think it's ideal to teach code switching, or do you think teaching code switching is just a coping mechanism because it's more difficult to change societal standards about what language varieties are valued? And then later on, the person asked, does teaching code switching devalue Black English, period, as well?
So I don't think it devalues Black English. In a way, well, I kind of look at it like it actually values Black English because it's basically saying that it's still right. It just sounds like this if you're using standard English, but what you said, it's still correct. So that's why I don't think that it devalues Black English. And then what was the other part of the question? I only got the end of it.
Okay, I gotta find it again, sorry.
I'm sorry, it was kind of long.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. Let's see, I've got it, I think. Yes. In schools, do you think it's ideal to teach code switching? Or do you think it's just a coping mechanism because it's more difficult to change society about what language varieties are valued and which are not?
Again, I feel like it depends on the age of the children. In the video, they were in 5th grade. And I still felt like that was kind of like early, but they seemed really smart. I wasn't that smart in 5th grade. So I feel like, you know, it fit the students. So I feel like it is ideal.
Yeah, I about your comment about those kids being really smart, I agree. Like they were talking about singular something pronouns. I was like, what?
Yeah, I just found that out like yesterday.
Yeah, I'm like, whoa. No, I think one part of that question was like if teaching code switching is like a coping mechanism because you can't change society, or if it's like an ideal thing to do. I think it's both. I think one, you're not going to change society like overnight from the values they place on certain language varieties, but I do think there might be a benefit in teaching code switching in schools. I think code switching is one of those things where it's like it's really just assigning a term to something we all already know and do to help people better kind of conceptualize of like what's going on, because even kids code switch. I believe everyone code switches, so just introducing that concept to them, I think, can be valuable, and I think it can really allow them to kind of consciously take hold of it and be like, okay, well, now that I understand what's going on here, I can utilize it in a way that is effective for me.
Do we have any other questions or comments? Can we, since everyone's already started to leave, can we thank our panelists for sharing? They were really amazing. I really felt like that was very informative. I will be sharing with them the open public comments on the chat that were whizzing by more quickly than we could all perhaps appreciate them. But I'm just very, very grateful that these young people, these current students and alums were willing to help educate the rest of the campus on this really important issue. So thank you all for being here too and for asking such great questions.
Can I add to George and JaNaya's point? I think, you know, teaching code switching is an opportunity to legitimize, especially Black and brown folks in the classroom. And so I think that there is a necessity to be able to, when we think about teaching for Black and brown lives, that this is, again, I know, and George, I agree, we're not going to change society overnight. And I believe that if we incorporate these things into the classroom, there's going to be an opportunity for us to legitimize and validate people's experiences. So I think personally, and I know no one asked my opinion, but I'm always willing to give it, that it is a great opportunity to legitimize and validate, particularly our communities that identify as BIPOC or people of color.
Thank you, Felicia. I mean, to that, thank you, Professor Burnett, for bringing your interlinguistics students here. Something that JaNaya may remember from her class, and Angelica, when she took this class, we looked at a speech therapist association's mission statement to not look at Black English as any kind of impediment or inferior variety that required interventions. It is not a disability. It, in fact, you know, is just a different sound system and grammar and vocabulary that some people who are often Black use some of the time, but not all Black people all of the time. And I think that was a very important professional mission statement to come out. And the more that educators and journalists and just the general population know about this topic, the better.
Just to jump in, hi, my name is Charity. I'm an alum, class of 2016. I was asked to speak regarding a comment that I made that I do actually work in childcare. I teach code switching to my students. I work with students ages 4 up to age 16. And I really started to do this when I was reading articles about countries in Sweden that were teaching sex education to kindergartners. And I thought, wow, what a profound concept that you can start to teach this. And the way that they teach it is that they break it down based on that age level. So maybe they're not going to understand the actual ins and outs of sexual health and relationships, but they can understand relationships, consent, asking people, can I hug you, can I give you a high five? And so I kind of applied those concepts to teaching code switching in childcare as well. So the way that we act at church might be different than the way that we act at home. Sometimes we'll not wear shoes at home, and that's absolutely fine. And then sometimes we're asked to wear shoes at school, and it's a little bit different, and you might not be as comfortable with it. Maybe you just like to be barefoot, and that's absolutely okay. Just in certain settings, we might be asked to change that for the different dynamic, and sometimes it can be tiring and it can be confusing. And so it's asking those questions, navigating those conversations, and understanding why sometimes we have to wear shoes at school and why we're allowed to wear our shoes off when we're at home. And so that's kind of the way that I start to build those dynamics. And then we'll just kind of scaffold it as years go on, saying, all right, so you might talk a certain way with your friends when you're outside of that situation, but you might not talk to your teacher that way. Both of those dynamics are okay. And as we continue to scaffold and build on those things, I'm just talking about neither of those things is wrong. It might be confusing as we start to move through it, but having that understanding of in certain settings, we act certain ways, and in other settings, we act other ways. All of those ways are okay, but as long as you're feeling comfortable, content, and safe in the space that you're in, that is the most important thing. And so, yeah, that's how I start to teach code switching to my kiddos.
Thank you for doing that work. That's amazing. Love to hear that. JaNaya had to go to class. She also will be on at 4 o'clock again. But just thank you all again for all of your great attention and support of our panelists and great questions. I'll share some resources with the Office of Multicultural Affairs to be disseminated and shared out. I want to thank Kate Stano for helping run the chat and admitting people into the room. And I want to thank David McMahon for recording the session so that it can be shared to an audience that couldn't all be here. Angelica, yes, please do.
I've been quiet on this whole, like, should we teach, should we do this? Because why teach that when we should teach people how to be inclusive and teach people to accept people for sounding different? Like all through school, people who were really who really spoke Spanish or were learning English were separated from us, and we cracked on them because they were just like in the corner and we didn't understand. But that's wrong. And now obviously I don't crack on people who don't speak English, but instead of outcasting them, we should learn to work with them. So instead of being a 30-year adult yelling at someone who doesn't speak English because you think you yelling is going to get them to understand you more, we should be teaching in grade school that we're in a world with how many different countries and how many different languages. We should learn how to interact with people who speak differently than what is standard, versus teaching people like me how to fit into the standard world. And that's what really troubles me with this question.
That's a great corrective. Absolutely.
I think it's wrong. What we're doing here is wrong. We shouldn't teach Black people or people of color how to fit into something. We should teach the world how to just accept one another.
I think that's a great closing point. George, do you want to weigh in?
No, I was going to say, I completely agree. And I think we can do both. I think, and I think both will be beneficial, but certainly not having the aspect that you spoke about is an issue. So
yeah, this is not about putting more work on Black folks to change. This is about changing societal expectations, removing these language judgments, teaching more people to understand, to celebrate language diversity, and that these are things that when it's geographical language diversity, we think are cool to talk about grinders versus subs versus whatever. We should celebrate other forms of linguistic diversity. It's a richness that, that the language should have instead of looking at it as a problem that has to be fixed. So very good corrective.
Could I just say that even the academic English is a dialect, if we
Of
teach
course
it
it is.
that way?
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's a set of just choices. They're not necessarily better or worse.
So even calling it mainstream or standard English, I think, can overprivilege it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But thanks. All right.
Well, clearly there was more that could be said here than we had time to do in a short session, but again, thank you. That was really good.
I have to head out, so thank you all. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Becky, did you want me to stay on for anything?
No,